Boker Tov.
Boker Tov. Who would guess I'd be up this early?
Yeah, there you go.
I
Yeah.
forgot what I was going to ask you on Friday was about my sister's getting married and they joined a congregation, and so the rabbi's going to be marrying them, and her husband's a cantor.
Mhm.
And she asked my sister, well, she said, well, he's not getting paid by the congregation. Can you give him something? She said, well, what does he want? And she said, well, I'll leave that up to you. And now my sister's like, what should I do? I was wondering if you had any hints or guidelines.
It'll be both the rabbi and the cantor?
Yeah, and the rabbi is the rabbi from the congregation that they're getting married in.
Yeah, $250.
Okay, a piece or total?
The rabbi generally gets more.
Okay, I'll tell her.
Because, the cantor's showing up and he's not doing any of the pre-wedding stuff with them.
Okay. No, he's not. Okay,
Yeah.
I will tell her, give her a ball, because she said wouldn't even give me a ballpark. And I'm like, okay.
Right. It's an uncomfortable situation. I've been there. It's an uncomfortable situation. $5,000. How's that sound?
Right.
What about donating to their discretionary funds?
Don't do that.
Don't do that?
No, it pisses, it's the rabbi, you may have to, but I know that when people do that, it's lovely, but it's not necessarily appreciated in the same way.
Okay.
What you're doing then is giving them money to have to use on somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's not something you really have as much discretion over as what's in your pocket.
Well, right. You really can't use it. It's not available to you to use for things that, you might want in your life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, good morning.
Hi, Phyllis.
Hi, Phyllis.
Haven't seen you in forever.
You're on mute. You're muted.
I can read her sign language. We can't hear you, Phyllis.
Oh, there you are.
That's one of
Hi.
my pet peeves. As much as I'm on Zoom, one would think. No, I'm always on and I'm always listening and participating, and I have my stuff, but usually I'm doing something else, or there's people in my household that are distracting or whatever. And
Sure.
And that's it. So, but today
No.
I got up at like 5 and I got my stuff done, and everybody else is sleeping. So we're good. How's everybody?
Fine.
Good to
Yeah,
see.
it's a nice day out too. So you're out. I was
So
just out
far,
there.
so good.
Sort of.
Yes. So
But
far, so
as
good.
long as
Yeah,
the
I don't want to
temperature's
wake
good.
anybody else up. I want them to sleep
It's
and leave
warm.
me alone.
Yeah, as long as the temperature's good.
Fine,
I was out. What do you call it? With a broom, sweeping up all the leaves this morning. It's beautiful out.
Man,
Okay.
on daylight savings day, I'm amazed.
Yep.
Yep.
I am just
I'm at the
not a
window to
morning
go for-
person.
Well, I felt it this morning. It just did not feel like 7:30.
Yeah.
It was dark.
Yeah,
Pretty
well, see, I got up at 5, so it's,
Lexi says hi.
I
Hi,
couldn't sleep.
Lexi. Look at her.
She looks like a dog.
Is that a dog?
Not acting like one.
So
Oh,
Alise, how are
Amy.
you on this day where we lost an hour?
I'm good. I was up at like 4:30 for some reason for like an hour.
You should have called me.
Yeah. I think, well,
Are you-
4:30 is what, 3:30 your time, right?
Mhm.
I'm North
Yeah.
Carolina.
Yeah. Generally,
I-
people don't appreciate calls at 3:30 in the morning.
No.
It's not a good sign.
Not
when the
even
phone
Phil.
rings
Bad
at
sign.
I turn my phone off. I
Yeah.
don't want to be woken.
Yeah, me too.
It ruins my whole night.
Gee, and Peter's trained the cat to wake him up pretty regularly around 3:30, 4 o'clock. She's a well-trained cat.
Here comes Joyce.
So we seem to have a gender divide here.
Happened. The men are all
Good
Morning, guys. Good
Good
morning.
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 Oh, there's
There's
Brian.
Gail.
Oh, there you go.
I wonder if I'll be able to see him on my screen here. I never have been able to. Well, I used to.
Weird. Mark, I don't have any of the things printed out, so don't ask me to write, to read.
All right, I'll try to remember. If I do, just wave at me. And
All right.
Huh. I
don't think-
upgraded
there's
Zoom.
not a lot of readings today.
When
Okay.
There's only
showtime.
four readings. You would have been the fourth, but I'll pass over you
All right.
in the spirit of the season.
Thank you.
That last one was I'm just can't wait to see the background on. Ooh.
On what?
That last reading, I just,
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh God,
Yeah.
this is bad.
I was reading this morning, a book came out about that, about Skokie, but also there's also lots of stuff on that one too. Yep.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Wait, is this unit 13 today?
Yes, it's post-Holocaust anti-Semitism.
Post-Holocaust?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As in that wasn't the end.
No.
Never the end. Never.
Never the end.
It bought us about 70 years of less intense anti-Semitism in general.
Yeah.
But there's been a return, 70 years in Jewish history is oftentimes, they expected the temple to rebuild, the first one, the second one. 70 years is sort of a marking point, and that was 2015, and we've seen the increase in anti-Semitism. Oftentimes, one of the things I describe is I think the deviance was those 70 years.
Yeah.
We've returned to the norm.
Yeah, I just wonder, where we're gonna be 5 years from now.
Isn't the protocols a big seller now again?
Oh, yeah.
Some corners.
I don't think anti-Semitism is at the level it was in the Middle Ages when we were accused of creating the plague and so on and so forth.
Poisoning.
And I hope it never gets there. Please God.
I mean, we got to have proportion. I mean, relatively speaking,
Right.
there are things that prick us now and we get upset about, but I don't sit in Maryland, Texas, worrying about anti-Semitism every day.
No,
I wonder-
it's probably more true in Europe where people are attacked on the streets.
Yeah, so when I was in Paris 10 years ago on a business trip, and I decided to go to shul, and I got the address of the shul, and I discovered that the shul was in a building in which there was no marking on the outside saying this is a shul, and you had to knock on the door and they had to let you in and all that stuff. You say, boy, this is different.
Yeah, Madrid was like that too.
Yeah, but I'm wondering what the Jews said, say back in the 20s. Oh, anti-Semitism isn't what it was back in such and such a year.
Well, right, but don't reach the conclusions that the inevitable outcome is to go that direction. Yeah, you're right. There's always that potential. I agree with you, Gail. But let's not jump to the inevitable outcome is another Holocaust. We're not ready. That's not.
I'm not saying a Holocaust, but difficult, very difficult times.
Could be. All right, I'm late. It is 10:02. Official Zoom time. Here we go. All right. So we are, as I said, we're in Unit 13. We're looking at post-Holocaust events. VE Day, May 8th, 1945, the day the Allies declare victory in Europe. And at that point, what you end up with is 30 million children, women, and men who have been displaced across the continent. Some had been imprisoned by the Nazis, well understood. Other displaced persons had fled their homes to avoid communist rule as the Soviet army was marching through Eastern Europe. Those mostly Baltic citizens who had collaborated with the Germans were also on the run because they feared that they'd be tried for treason or murdered if they returned home. Among those millions, 30 million DPs, were a few 100,000 Jews, because that's really all that was left. Most were physically and emotionally shattered, and they were also fearful of becoming Soviet slaves because that's what the Nazi propaganda had taught them. The Soviet Union is going to enslave them. Before the war ended, the Allies, led by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, had done some preparation for this occupation of Greater Germany. They knew it was coming. Every zone had the same goal: to send every DP home as quickly as is possible. But until transportation becomes available to the degree they needed, the Allies set up emergency centers to provide food, shelter, and medical care. This massive effort, if you look at it in the global sense, was extraordinarily successful. With millions of people were home within weeks of the war's end, including many, many Jews. Yet despite the incredible success, by the end of 1945, there were still 1.5 million DPs still in emergency centers, including about 75,000 Jews. Now, the way in which the treatment of these people in the camps was really determined was by their nationality. And as a result, in a bizarre way, the Allies regarded German and Austrian Jews not as victims of the Nazis, but as the enemy expatriates. All right? And so the result is many Jews found themselves in DP camps alongside former concentration camp guards who now were also DP status. Physicians and other relief workers were also unprepared for what they discovered with the survivors of the genocide. One relief worker described how hard it was, not hard for us to believe, but for him to believe how hard it was to get these people to take a shower. Women screamed, the workers noted, and quite a few had to be forcibly pushed or carried into the shower. And we can understand that. There's a new book that came out in 2019 called The Last Million by David Nasaw, N-A-S-A-W, who describes for the 3 to 5 years that people found themselves in those camps. And it's a worthy read, The Last Million. A number of American soldiers and army chaplains, particularly those who were Jewish chaplains, were troubled, obviously, by the treatment of Jews in the camps. Some wrote letters home describing the refugees' plight. Many urged relatives and friends to pass this information on to reporters, to politicians, to relief agencies, and a few of those letters reached President Truman. So did complaints from the Jewish relief agencies, who were being denied permission to enter the camps to help the survivors. At Truman's request, the US state government sent Earl Harrison to Germany and Austria to investigate what the reality was. Harrison and his advisors toured about 30 camps and interviewed dozens of officers, relief workers, soldiers, and Jewish DPs. On August 24th, 1945, so we're talking a couple months after the war, Harrison sent Truman a bombshell, and that's reading number 1. Sarah, you've got box number 1.
We appear to be treating the Jews as the Nazis treated them, except that we do not exterminate them. They are in concentration camps in large numbers under our military guard instead of SS troops. One is led to wonder whether the German people, seeing this, are not supposing that we are following or at least condoning Nazi policy. Generally speaking, 3 months after VE Day, and even longer after the liberation of individual groups, many Jewish displaced persons and other possibly non-repatriables are living under guard behind barbed wire fences in camps of several descriptions built by the Germans for slave laborers and Jews, including some of the most notorious of the concentration camps, amidst crowded, frequently unsanitary, and generally grim conditions. In complete idleness with no opportunity except surreptitiously to communicate with the outside world, waiting, hoping for some kind of word of encouragement and action on their behalf.
Thank you. So Harrison believed that these conditions were unlikely to improve unless the Allies treated Jews as a special group, even though, as he said, it's not normally desirable to set aside particular racial or religious groups from their national categories. He argued that the plain truth is that this was done so long by the Nazis that a group had been created nonetheless on its own with special needs. Truman turns around and sends Eisenhower, the General Eisenhower, the head of the Allied forces in Europe, a copy of Harrison's report, along with a letter demanding that the armed forces do a better job. Eisenhower, although he's upset because they've gotten, as I said to you, they were so successful in the larger picture, he's upset that Harrison has ignored his successes. Nonetheless, he orders his officers to set up separate camps for Jewish DPs and make their needs a priority. But many of the officers who were in charge had different views of their own priorities. And as a result, how Jews were treated depended on who was in charge of a particular camp. Most Jewish DPs in the American zones were in southern Germany, an area administered by Patton. In a diary entry dated September 15th, 1945, Patton expressed his disdain for Harrison and the DPs, saying the following: Harrison and his ilk believe that the DP is a human being, which he is not. And this applies particularly to the Jews who are lower than animals. George S. Patton. Setting up the camps for the Jewish DPs was a stopgap measure. We know that. It did not address what Harrison saw as the real major central problem. These displaced persons had no place to go. There was little or nothing left of their previous lives. Their families had been murdered, their communities destroyed. There was no home. All right. In the German-controlled areas, some people attributed what remained as a virulent anti-Semitism to guilt for turning a blind eye to the murder of their neighbors, aiding the Germans, or taking the belongings Jews had left in their safekeeping. There was plenty of reason for guilt. Others attributed the rise in anti-Semitism following the war to the fear that Jewish survivors would seek revenge on those who had betrayed them. And so you've got a no-win. In the United States, opinion polls suggested that people who disliked Jews before the Holocaust did not like them any better after the Holocaust. Many of them expressed the opinion that the Jews were a godless people who controlled US money and wealth. I'm going to give you 3 years of surveys: 1942, 44, and 45. 1942, just a few weeks after Japan bombs the Pearl Harbor, pollsters found the following: nearly 25% of Americans believed that the Japanese were the greatest threat to America. 18% believed it was the Germans. 15% believed it was the Jews. 1944, 2 years later, 11 months before the war ends, the numbers have shifted. 24% now believe the Jews are the biggest threat, 9% Japanese, and 6% German. So the Jews are a bigger threat than the combination of both Japanese and Germans during the middle of a war against the Japanese and the Germans. 1945, another poll shows that 58%, this is after the war, 58% of Americans believe that Jews have too much power in the United States. This is home, people. Poland. When Germany and the Soviet Union had divided Poland in 1939, many of the Poles believed that the Soviet Union was the greater threat to them. The Jews in Poland disagreed. All right. Indeed, most of the Jews who ultimately survived the Holocaust, despite the fact that the Soviet Union was no haven, did so because they found a safe place in the Soviet rule. But the result of this is tensions between the Poles and the Jews intensified because they're identifying with different enemies. And the Soviet Union, which had liberated Poland from the Germans, established a communist government there. And so those tensions get even further aroused. Concerned by the growing violence, Joseph Tenenbaum, the president of the American-based World Federation of Polish Jews, travels to Warsaw in 1946, and he goes there to meet with Cardinal August Holland, the head of Poland's Catholic Church. That's spelled H-L, there's no vowel there, H-L-O-N-D. I've also seen it as A-N-D. He hoped to persuade the cardinal to aid the Jewish survivors, and the cardinal refuses. The cardinal insists that the Jews are being killed in retaliation for the murder of Christian population by the Jewish communist-run Polish government. So the communists, Jews are communists. Anywhere the communists rule, it's the Jews who are doing the killing, even though the communists have no use for the Jews and they hate the Jews too. The cardinal claims that Jews had provoked the violence by accepting jobs in Poland's government, quote, in endeavor to introduce a governmental structure that a majority of the people do not desire. And the cardinal confirmed what many Jews already believed: they had no future in Poland. This need to help Polish Jews took on a new urgency in the summer of 1946. On July 4th of that summer, a young man in Kielce, that's spelled K-I-E-L-C-E, a small city about 120 miles south of Warsaw, falsely claims that the Jews had kidnapped him. He told the police that he had been taken to a basement where he witnessed the murder of 15 Christian children for their blood. And so once again, the ritual murder accusation shows its head. Within hours, about 5,000 angry protesters had surrounded a building owned by the Jewish community and attacked every Jew inside. When the rampage ended, 75 Jews were injured and 41 were dead, including young children. Put on your walking shoes. We're going to the Middle East. Anti-Semitism was also on the rise in the Middle East and North Africa in the late 1940s. Some have attributed the increase in anti-Semitism to Zionism, the intent to form a Jewish homeland. Conor Cruz O'Brien, an Irish diplomat in the Middle East, strongly disagreed with that sentiment. And he wrote, reading number 2, Gail, you've got square number 2.
Britain and France disengaged from the Middle East and North Africa around the middle of the 20th century and were replaced by Arab nationalist governments. Jews had to be at risk. Throughout these vast regions, even if there had never been any Zionism, Jews had helped spread the Western influence and had benefited from it. They had welcomed the coming of European rule and benefited from that. With the withdrawal of the Europeans and the coming to power of fervid Arab nationalist governments, the Jews in every decolonized country were bound to be unpopular and in some danger.
Okay. Jews in every country in the region had their own story and own unique history. But I'm going to use Iraq as an example, Iraqi Jews in the 1940s, to some of the challenges that the Jews faced. Challenges, as we've just read, that had everything to do with not Zionism, but what O'Brien calls fervid Arab nationalism. Naim Katan, who was an an Iraqi Jew and a writer, has described that nationalism as wounded honor. a fierce pride that was rooted in the resentment and rage over colonial rule. Again, the Arabs have been under the rule of the European countries. Despite the threat that the Jews faced in Europe, Kutin was confident that his classmates were attracted, his nation mates were attracted to the Nazis. In other words, the Iraqis wanted to bind with the Nazis, not because they were necessarily anti-Semitic, but because the Germans were the enemy of Iraq's enemy, the British. Okay. In 1940, Rashid Ali al-Gailani, a popular Iraqi politician with strong Nazi sympathies, becomes prime minister with support from the military. In other words, it's a coup. Almost immediately, he allies Iraq with Germany and declares war on Britain. Do you understand why the Arabs are anti-British? It was a very popular move with all but the Jews. And so the Jews, by definition, are now supporting those who are anti-Iraq. Young Muslims, as a result, roam the streets, arresting Jews as spies and sometimes executing them on the spot. During the rioting, 179 Jews are killed, 240 children now become orphans, 586 businesses are looted, 911 apartment buildings are destroyed, which is home to more than 12,000 Jews. That's Iraq. Egypt. The Nazis were also popular with the Egyptian nationalists in the 1930s and 1940s. 1933, Ahmad Hussein, an Egyptian lawyer who wants to free his nation from British influence, creates a movement known as Young Egypt. And he models it after Britain's enemy, Hitler's Nazi Party. Those same ideas influenced the Muslim Brotherhood, which is founded by an educator, and it's similar to the Young Egypt in that they want an independent country free of foreign rule. But unlike Young Egypt, the Brotherhood was suspicious of modern ways and determined to apply Islamic law to all parts of Egyptian life, including the government. This combination of religious and national fervor struck a chord. And you could see that happening in America too. You know, when you've got that nationalism and you've got the religious drive. By 1938, the group had 200,000 members and had spread to other countries, including Lebanon and Syria. During World War II, members of Young Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood tried to overthrow the king of Egypt. Among those conspirators who tried to do this overthrow were Nasser, a member of Young Egypt, who became the second president of Egypt, and Sadat, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, who became the nation's third president. The British, who had been, by this point, the British who have controlled much of the Middle East, have been struggling to contain this wave of nationalism post-war that had been sweeping the region really since the 1920s. Nowhere was this task more difficult than in Palestine, where you had not only Arab nationalism, but Jewish nationalism playing out at the same time. In 1919, as we discussed, the League of Nations had divided parts of the old Ottoman Empire into mandates, territories that are being held in trust by a European power until they're ready for independence. And Palestine was one of those mandates under British rule. At the time when this is issued, it contains approximately 512,000 Muslims, 66,000 Jews, and 61,000 Christians. So it's a mixed bag to begin with. Additionally, as we talked about, 1917, you had the Balfour Declaration, which promised the Jews a national homeland. And they also made, as we discussed, a parallel promise to Hussein bin Ali, a descendant of Muhammad and the powerful head of the Arab clan that guarded Islam's holiest shrines in Medina and Mecca. Hussein was told that he could establish an independent Arab kingdom under his family's rule. And where initially there was some discussions, could the Jews and the Arabs work together? There was some. Ultimately, there was no willingness to negotiate between the two groups. The British took land from Palestine in this process and created a new country, Transjordan, now today that what we call Jordan. Despite, however, naming an Arab leader king of this new nation, everyone knew that Britain still controlled both nations. Britain's refusal to end colonial rule only fuels resentment, anger, and a further sense of betrayal all through the region. In the late 20s and 30s, new leaders had emerged, many of whom found inspiration in the writing of Adolf Hitler. One of Hitler's most vocal supporters in Palestine was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini. The British had appointed him to be the Mufti, not because they thought he was wonderful, but because he was a troublemaker and they figured they could give him something and just keep him quiet. However, al-Husseini makes no secret of his admiration for the Nazis, again, who are the British enemy. He had particular praise for Mein Kampf, in which Hitler insists that Jews do not at all intend to build a Jewish state in Palestine. They only want an organization center for their international world swindling. Now, in the 1930s, al-Husseini and many Palestinians were alarmed by the sharp rise in Jewish immigration to Palestine. And in 1939, because of the protests by the Arabs, in an effort to quiet those protests, Britain limited Jewish immigration to Palestine to 15,000 people each year for a period of 5 years. So at the time of the worst of Nazi atrocities, severe limitations are put on immigration into Israel. That decision obviously horrifies those who are aware of the Nazi threat in Europe. Despite Jewish protests, restrictions on Jewish immigration remain in effect even after the war. In 1946, following the war, a new British and American binational committee heard testimony in Europe and the Middle East, and then called on Britain to issue 100,000 certificates of immigration to the Jewish DPs. This is one of the ways in which they were trying to resolve, what do we do with these people who have no place to go? So they suggest the issuing of 100,000 certificates of entry. In addition, the binational group, recommends an end to British rule over Palestine and the creation of an Arab Jewish state, an idea that is rejected by almost everyone in Palestine. In a letter to a London newspaper, Richard Crossman, who's a British representative on that binational committee, defends their recommendations. And that's reading number 3, Phyllis, square number 3.
Okay. The tragedy of Palestine is that our obligations to the Jews and the Arabs are contradictory. We cannot do justice to the one without doing injustice to the other. And at the moment, we are doing grave injustice to both. When I weighed up the political objections of the Arabs against the human needs of the homeless survivors of Polish Jewry, I felt that the issue of 100,000 certificates was a lesser injustice than the refusal to do so.
Okay. So the committee's recommendations are never carried out. All right. Nonetheless, Americans praised what a great plan. And the British turn around and say to the Americans, really? Your hypocrisy is amazing. You won't let any Jews in either. How dare you praise this plan? Violence is growing. The British in 1947 said, "Genug." They decide to turn over their mandate to the newly formed United Nations. And in May, the General Assembly sets up the UN Special Committee on Palestine to recommend a solution to the conflict. In July of that year, 2 months later, a dramatic incident alters the way some of the committee members see what's going on there. On July 11th of 47, an old American ferry boat that Zionists called the Exodus, you probably have seen the movie, sailed from France with more than 4,500 Jewish refugees on board. Those refugees from France had fled Germany and were planning to enter Palestine illegally because they had no other place to go. July 18th, a week later, 4 British destroyers surround and storm the Exodus, killing 3 people and injuring 28 more. They then bring the boat into the port of Haifa and transport the passengers onto Navy transports to take them back to Germany. 4 members of the UN committee were in Haifa when the Exodus entered the port, and they watched in horror as the dead and wounded were brought ashore and witnessed these frightened children peeking out the portholes of the ships as they're being deported back to Germany. August 31, with memories of the incident of the Exodus still fresh, the committee sends its report to the UN, and it recommends that Palestine be divided into 2 separate states, one Jewish, one Arab. As the UN is debating this proposal, the Palestinian Arab Higher Committee warns that if this proposition does pass, the position of Jews who are living in the Arab world will become very precarious. Despite that warning, November 29, 1947, the General Assembly votes to create 2 states, a great moment in Jewish history. The Jewish agency accepts the plan, the Arabs do not. Hassan al-Banna of the Muslim Brotherhood, an ally of the Mufti in Jerusalem, viewed the division of Palestine as an international plot carried out by the Americans, the Russians, and the British under the influence of the Jewish Zionists. Needless to say, Jews see this statement as anti-Semitic, particularly the false claims of an international plot. It's hitting all their bells. All right. By May 1948, May 14th, the Jewish community in Palestine, headed by David Gurion, establishes the state of Israel. Within hours, the armies of Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon attacked the new nation. Those Arab countries who don't send any members for troops, nonetheless support the war financially. And so it comes back to it on a practical level. This would have created an Arab state. So the question is, why didn't they want this? Okay, why wouldn't they take the practical outcome? And the answer again comes back to this nationalistic concept. Arab nationalists believed that the Arab people were bound by more than just a common language, religion, and history. They also shared a goal, and that is the end of Western influence in the Middle East. And a Jewish state is viewed as nothing more than an extension of Western influence. So yes, it's Jew hatred, but it's more than that. It's much more than that. Both sides are outraged by the violence committed by the other, the Jews and the Arabs. And let's not be unrealistic. The Jews committed quite a number of their own little atrocities during these years. Gradually, each side came to view its own people as victims and its opponents as powerful, aggressive, and dangerous. Those are not the conditions on which compromise is reached. When the fighting in Palestine ends in January 1949, Israel controlled all the territory that the UN had allotted to it, plus about half of the land that had been set aside for the Arabs. The other half of that land was divided between Jordan and Egypt. Jordan held East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Egypt controlled Gaza Strip. By the spring of 49, Israel had signed a ceasefire agreement with Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. But although those four countries agreed to a truce, they refused to recognize Israel, to negotiate any kind of borders, or to set any kind of terms for a lasting peace. In their mind, this was temporary. In the course of that fighting, many Palestinian Arabs became refugees. There's no agreement as to the numbers. The lowest number is 520,000, and that's an Israeli number. And the highest number is 850,000. That's the Arab estimate. In 1948, with no solution to this refugee problem in sight, the UN takes charge of the Palestinian refugees, which it defined as individuals who had lived in Palestine between June 46 and May 1948, a 2-year period, and had lost their homes and means of livelihood as a result of the conflict. That definition now applies to all of their descendants as well. While much attention is paid to these Palestinian refugees, a lot less attention is paid to another group of refugees who are also forced out of their homes as a result of this conflict. The approximately 875,000 Jews who lived in Arab nations and North Africa. Most of these families had lived in those areas not for 2 years, but in many cases for 2,500 years. And by the 1960s, all but a handful had been forced into exile. We hear nothing about the fact that these people should be given their lands back. All we hear is about that the Palestinians should be given their homes back. And while the argument, there's validity to one argument, one would have to make a parallel validity to the second for it to hold any weight. I'll stop for a second. Yeah, I don't want to get into a lot of politics, but I'll stop for a second and I'll take a second for any comments or questions. And then we'll go into America.
Mark, I just wanted to mention that when I lived in Jerusalem, I lived on a street called the 29th of November.
Oh,
Kaftet November.
yeah, nice. Sarah.
Just going back a little bit further in the beginning of the lesson, do we have a number of people who may have died in the DP camps because of the treatment there?
I don't have it. I'm sure you can find that online. I have no doubt. Yeah. Okay. Let's shift over to America, basically from 1955 to about 1985. A new organization called the Liberty Lobby was a political advocacy organization founded in 1955 by William Carto. It self-describes as a pressure group for patriotism, the only lobby in Washington, D.C. registered with Congress which is wholly dedicated to the advancement of government policies based on our Constitution and conservative principles. While the Liberty Lobby, I can't say this word, lobby, was founded as a conservative political organization, William Carto was known to hold strongly anti-Semitic views and to be a devotee of the writings of Francis Parker Yockey, who was one of a handful of post-World War II defenders of the revered Adolf Hitler. Evidence for the anti-Semitic stances of this Liberty Lobby begin to mount when letters by Carto excoriating the Jews and blaming them for the world's miseries begin to surface, with statements like, how could the West have been so blind? It was the Jews and their lies that blinded the West as to what Germany was doing. Hitler's defeat was the defeat of Europe and America. Many critics of this organization, including the ADL, have noted that William Carto, more than anybody else, was responsible for keeping organized anti-Semitism alive as a viable political movement during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when it was otherwise completely discredited. The Liberty Lobby attempted to promote a public image of a conservative anti-communist group along the lines of the John Birch Society. But while the John Birch Society rejected white supremacy and anti-Semitism, the Liberty Lobby promoted them. Carta, while this was all going on, is building other organizations as well that would have a more explicit neo-Nazi orientation. Among these were the National Youth Alliance, founded in 1958. The organization ultimately, because he loses control of the organization, it changes its name, it becomes the National Alliance, and the new leader of this organization is William Luther Pierce. The National Alliance is considered to be, all through this time, the most well-known and most popular neo-Nazi group operating in the United States. And the writer, the leader, Pierce, also writes a novel, quote, called The Turner Diaries, which is really a manifesto of hate and a call for race war and genocide. It was written in 1978. It describes a violent revolution, an overthrow of the US government, nuclear war, and racial war in which there is an extermination of all non-whites. It's never reviewed in the mainstream, and nonetheless, it sells more at that time than 250,000 copies. Just recently, it's been removed from Amazon. But nonetheless, it has been cited as a blueprint, even today, for white nationalists and extremists. This book is reported to have been the gospel truth for Timothy McVeigh and the rationale for bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City in '95. Holocaust denial is also another feature of the Turner Diaries. The book claims that the German POWs were tortured in mass into confessing to war crimes, including Eichmann. Rather than being victims, it was the Jews in 1939 who had declared war on Germany. This last reading, number 4, are some excerpts from the Turner Diary. Jeannie, you said you don't have it. So Alise, you win square number 4, and about halfway through, Lori, if you'll pick up.
All right, number 4, hold on. There is no way we can destroy the system without hurting many thousands of innocent people. No way. It is a cancer too deeply rooted in our flesh. And if we don't destroy the system before it destroys us, if we don't cut this cancer out of our living flesh, our whole race will die. The corruption of our people by the whole Jewish, liberal, democratic, egalitarian plague, which afflicts us, is more clearly manifested in our soft-mindedness, our unwillingness to recognize the harder realities of life than in anything else. Is that halfway?
No, keep going.
Oh, okay, sorry. Liberalism is an essentially feminine, submissive worldview.
Lady, how do you like that one?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, keep going.
Check, check. Perhaps a better adjective is infantile. It is the worldview of men who do not have the moral toughness, the spiritual strength to stand up and do single combat with life, who cannot adjust to the reality that world is not a pink and blue padded nursery in which the lions lie down with the lambs and everyone lives happily ever after.
One more paragraph.
Okay. Nor should spiritually healthy men of our race want the world to be like that, if it could be so. This is an alien, essentially Jewish approach to life, the worldview of slaves rather than free men of the West. Whoa.
Thank you. Yeah. Lori?
All the liberals and the Jews had to do was begin screeching about inhumanity or genocide, and most of our people who had been beating around the edges of a solution took to their heels like frightened rabbits. Because there was never a way to solve the race problem which could be fair for everybody, or which everyone concerned could be politely persuaded into accepting without any fuss or unpleasantness, they kept trying to avoid it, hoping it would go away by itself. And the same has been true of the Jewish population, Jewish problem. We had chance after chance to save ourselves, most recently in World War II, when the Germans and the Jews were locked in struggle for the mastery of Central and Eastern Europe. We ended up on the Jewish side in that struggle, primarily because we had chosen corrupt men as our leaders, and we had corrupt leaders because we value the wrong things in life. We must look at our situation collectively in a race-wide sense. We must understand that our race is like a cancer patient undergoing drastic surgery in order to save his life. There is no sense in asking whether the tissue being cut out is innocent or not. That is no more reasonable than trying to distinguish the good Jews from the bad ones. Your day is coming, Jews, your day is coming.
Does this sound familiar to anyone? It's a blueprint. This morning I was reading and I found the following that Turner had written. He said, the real value of all our attacks today lies in the psychological impact, not the casualties. They learn that not one of them is beyond our reach. Capitol uprising, anyone? If there are a couple comments, I'll take a couple and then we'll go on to Skokie. Yes, Gail.
Yeah, and what occurs to me is that when we talk about this type of rhetoric that's, pretty commonplace today on both sides of the political spectrum, the terminology we hear is cancel culture. So, when you want to comment on that, you're accused of canceling culture. This is our culture.
Right.
Anti-Semitism and racism must be our culture. Ingrained in our culture. Excuse me.
Yeah. It's a perfect example of Holocaust denial. Everything's up for discussion. There is no truth. Right? All right.
Well, it's pretty clear, Mark, that there is a segment of American society, I don't know how big it is, that believes this stuff today.
Yeah, you realize if it's only 10%, only, that's 35 million people.
That's a lot of people. 10%
It's still
is a
too
lot.
much. One is too much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's enormous.
Yep.
All right.
It could spread, and it could spread. That's a serious problem.
Yeah, I mean that is the danger. It not only can spread, so the internet is the enabler. Because when you discover that there are other people out there that support your view, all it does is solidify your view. Plus the fact psychologically, once you put your views on paper, it solidifies your own stand, or on paper, in this case, online. It solidifies your own feelings about that, and therefore it's harder to walk away from. It's a no-win. Yes, Sarah.
Yeah, the thought is that if it's on the internet, it must be true.
Must be true.
And,
Yeah.
you see how fast the protocol spread, and they didn't have internet, and they didn't have the mail systems. They didn't have air travel like we do.
Yeah.
It's scary.
How many of you, when you see a political argument, read the comments afterwards? I've just stopped reading. Because I can't stand what people say. It's just, I can't stand reading the comments. I'll read the article. I don't want to see what people say. Gail?
Yeah, I only hope that those comments represent a tiny fraction of a percent of people, because those are the people that tend to to participate in that dialogue.
You're
But I don't
probably
know.
right, but it influences others who read it. There's no question about it. All right, I'm going to take us to Skokie. Skokie, Illinois, which is about 45 minutes drive north of Chicago, was traditionally home to a sizable Jewish population. From what I was reading, out of 70,000 people at the time who lived in Skokie, about 40,000 were Jewish. Okay, so we're talking about 57% of the population. In 77 and 78, members of the National Socialist Party of America, which is an offshoot of the American Nazi groups, led by Frank Collin, who was their leader, attempted a march through Skokie. They had originally planned a rally in Marquette Park in Chicago. And the city, not fully didn't want to leave any angles to deal with, but placed a ban on all demonstrations in the park. So this way they didn't have to single them out. All park demonstrations were banned. And so they chose to look for another venue, and they chose Skokie. Now, Skokie not only has 40,000 Jews at the time, but it was also known as one of the largest population of Holocaust survivors in the world. The mayor claimed at the time that Skokie had the largest number of survivors outside of Israel, somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 Jews. Now, whether or not it was the largest, I can't tell you, but that was the mayor's claim. Okay? They believed, the Nazis believed it would be, the locals believed it would be disruptive. And so they refused to allow the march to happen. And they passed 3 new ordinances. 1, marches would require a deposit. 2, all marches in military uniforms would be banned. And 3, there'd be no distribution of hate speech literature allowed at any rally. So, needless to say, this is the same battle we have today. The ACLU intercedes on behalf of this party who is seeking a parade. Many new ACLU members resign as a result, but it really brings to the forefront how nothing is black and white in the world. We'd all fight for free speech, and so that you're looking at a no-win argument. On January 27, 1978, the Illinois Supreme Court allows the march. As a result, Skokie issues a parade permit on June 25th of 78 while taking the case to the US Supreme Court. However, Chicago realizes what's going on, and they lift the Marquette Park ban. And that is where the rally ultimately happens in Chicago, July 7, 78, instead of Skokie. On the day of the march, the New York Times estimates that 2,000 counter-protesters drowned out the group of, listen to this, a total of 20 neo-Nazis. That was the parade, 20. The Chicago Tribune reported that the rally sputtered to an unspectacular end after 10 minutes. We all know of this event, and relative to what's going on in our world today, it was inconsequential. 20 people marching for 10 minutes, outshouted by 2,000. But you can't help but hear the reminiscence of Charlottesville. All right? And people have written of both Skokie and Charlottesville. The purpose was to assert that they are a powerful force in American politics. Nothing more. It's to let people know they are there. And ultimately, Skokie led in response to a lot more outspokenness among survivors. And that really culminated in the 1980 TV miniseries, The Holocaust, which really opened up the world to many Holocaust survivors who prior to that were reluctant to speak about their experiences. And these events normalized it and provoked responses by Holocaust survivors who speak, all over the world since. So I know this is much more modern, and so there's probably a lot more comments. I'm open to comments and thoughts at this point. This is, yes, Sandy.
Okay, several things. One is that frequently the ACLU lawyers who are representing the people who are spewing hate speech are Jews.
And he was the leader of the
not at all unusual. Second is that while this is an event that probably caused many Holocaust survivors to open up, it was also coincided with the age of a lot of people. And as they reached their 70s and they suddenly realized the story had to be told. And in Houston, again, having grown up here, there weren't a lot of Holocaust survivors who talked about it except Siggy Isaacson, who I know his son, his older son, well, and he talked about it all the time. And finally, enough survivors wanted to tell their story. And that's what led to the Holocaust Museum. And a decision was made actually by the Jewish Federation, which was supporting this, that it would not be, at one point it was going to be a second floor of the Federation building, but the decision was made, no, this has to be in the museum district because it has to be something that the population sees. It's not just for the benefit of the Holocaust survivors, so for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, no, you can imagine, Sandy, from what you, 30 years living in America post-Holocaust, they were probably finally beginning to believe this was a safe place. And so they're starting to feel more comfortable about talking. And at the same time, here's this sudden threat to that whole sense of this is comfortable. You can just see how it would emerge. And I appreciate the history on the Houston component of it. Rosalind, I can't see, I don't see everybody. I'm sorry. Rosalind, go ahead. Thank you, Alise. Oh, Rosalind, you have your mic on. Is there? Oh, so there are no other comments? Wow. Wow. All right. You know, to me, what I take away from this is this is a lot to take away from it. That Turner Diaries reading as a manifesto, as a blueprint, is terrifying. Because you can see it, it's not just history. You can see it playing out in today's world. It's real. So.
Yeah, so
All
Mark,
right.
I just looked up Amazon to see. So yeah, you're right. The Turner Diaries are not on Amazon anymore, but there are plenty of other books about that you can, if you want to read them, around
For sure. Absolutely, for sure. For sure. All right. Our last class is next week. And then I'm going to take a bit of a hiatus. We'll start up again before the holidays. I've been teaching pretty much every week since COVID started. And I think I'm a bit fried. So we're going to take a short hiatus. We will continue on with American Jewish history. And then I think I'm starting to work on a course on rabbinic times and Talmudic times on the history of that period. So that would be the one that follows that. I'm just started working on that myself. All right. I hope everybody has a good week. Stay healthy, stay well. Let's see you back next week. Glad you made it at 10 o'clock the right time.
Thank you.
Sounds like it's going to be a lot more,
Thank you.
more
very
cheerful
much.
next set of classes.
Yes, for sure.
A happier outcome. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes,
It's
indeed.
the Passover food drive today, guys.
Okay, food drive.
Anti-Semitism in universities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.